Hey everyone, it's patch 3.24 Necropolis, and today it's time to talk about the patch notes and all the new things that are going to be coming out with the new season for Path of Exile. Now, this season is looking to be, well, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. At first, I was really excited. Everything that they showcased in the reveal live stream was insane and amazing. And we're getting a lot of really good changes for Endgame. I think people are going to be very happy with the new Endgame progression curve for PoE. And I think, honestly, these Endgame changes are going to be a pretty big highlight of PoE in general for quite a while. We've already had pretty decent endgame, but GG is very much focusing down on all the things people didn't like about endgame and are massively making everything a lot better. But at the same time, quite a lot of really stupid nerfs happen in my opinion, and a lot of outrage is happening over some of these nerfs, myself included. I think some of these are very stupid for the game, but we shall see how they actually all play out. So the first thing that we should actually discuss is going to be the new season mechanic itself, and that's going to be Necropolis. Now, Necropolis is going to basically be a take on, I would say, bestiary / harvest is the best way I can put it. Basically, what's going to happen is in every single zone, you are going to be able to have the option to either just go into the zone normally or to go into the zone with the lantern. And what the lantern is going to do is it's going to mark a few enemies throughout your map, kind of like Metamorph. And then those enemies are going to have additional modifiers on them that are going to make them a little bit harder. And the nice thing is you can actually change these modifiers to be on different monsters. So you can play around with it a little bit to make some enemies easier or harder. And in some cases, they're going to also have reward modifiers on them, such as increased quant or experience or rarity. And very rarely, when you do kill these monsters, you're going to get yourself a corpse. Now, this corpse is going to automatically be picked up by the Gravedigger, which is going to bring the corpse back to the main place we're going to be interacting with Necropolis. And these corpses are basically going to kind of work like beasts from bestiary, to where you can bottle them up and sell them to people if you do want to sell them. And they're going to be used in the new crafting method that you're going to be able to have access to with Necropolis, that's going to allow you to combine the corpses, which give you random modifiers for whatever craft you're currently doing, to be able to kind of target an item of your choosing. It's kind of like Harvest, except you're making the item from scratch and you have one go at it. And the nice thing about all this, and the reason you're going to want to care about this, is because we're going to have new modifiers that are not available anywhere else. Now, some of the modifiers they've showcased are actually pretty strong. For example, we can get +1 power charges on a helmet without any influence, and you could potentially get +2 power charges on a helmet without corrupting a helmet. You could potentially synthesize it and then re-roll these Sentient Blisses for +1 power charge, which is kind of crazy in my opinion, and this is going to basically be the new meta for all mirror tier crafting, which is going to be pretty interesting. A TLDR of the crafting system at a high level is basically going to be Crucible, except for every slot in the game. So it's going to be kind of annoying, but we'll see. It's really just going to depend on how easy is it for you to obtain corpses. Now, that is not everything that you're going to be able to get from Necropolis. We have quite a lot of other things attached to Necropolis that I'm very excited about. So the other thing to mention is going to be the new embers that you're going to have access to whenever you kill these random monsters that are marked within your map. These embers are going to be giving you a different effect for the next map that you use them in. And the one that we're really interested in here, because this is going to be a massive deal for the future of the game, is that one of the embers allows you to get tattoos. Now, this means tattoos are back in the game and they will be obtainable through Necropolis, but I do want to mention that all of the OP tattoos, such as +1 projectile or plus additional skill levels, are not coming back. We're only getting some of the minor ones like resistances, ES, spell suppression, potentially flask duration, all the minor ones that were kind of nice to have, but none of the super major ones like reservation efficiency or max res or onslaught or any of those. So don't expect these tattoos to be full on ancestor tattoos, but they'll definitely be pretty strong. So with all the Necropolis talk out of the way, why don't we talk about all of the bad things that are going to be coming with this patch, as I think these are going to be the sticking points for a lot of people, and these are going to be the things that most people are going to be interested in. So the first thing that we should talk about is going to be the massive nerf to pretty much every single build in the game. The mana cost Flask craft is completely removed from the game, along with the mana cost reduction dual roll, which means that quite a lot of builds are impacted by this. In my opinion, Cast on Crit is almost basically dead, just due to the fact that it's lost so much mana cost reduction that there's no feasible way, in my opinion, to put together a Cast on Crit build that is not going to be severely hampered by your need to be able to find as much reduced mana cost as possible to actually make the build playable. Not only this, but Pathfinders in general got nerfed, and pretty much almost every Mageblood build in the game got nerfed at the same time, because not only is the mana cost Flask craft going away, but the elemental resistance Flask roll suffix is also being reduced reduced in basically half. And at the same time, we are having a change to Topaz, Ruby, and Sapphire Flask, which is making them give you 10% less resistance than before. And instead of them making you take less damage, you are now going to be getting maximum resistance. Now, personally, I'm kind of a fan of the max res change, as for some builds, it's a pretty big buff. For example, melding builds are going to love this, while for some builds, it's a pretty big nerf because you're already hitting near 90% all res by default anyways, so the less damage was better. And a lot of people are going to be polarized on this based on which side of that fence you're on in terms of the build you're playing. Some other nerfs to player power is with Bloodnotch. The mastery is being completely removed. That allows you to have your stun threshold be based on your energy shield. And instead, a new keystone is going to be added onto Passatory. It's going to do the same thing. That's going to add the stun threshold you'd gain from your ES onto your life pool, effectively completely killing Bloodnotch and making it completely unusable. Not only that, but we also have pretty massive Headhunter nerfs. But at the same time, if you're not using a Headhunter, there's a pretty big buff to how safe you're going to be in maps in general. A Soul Eater is being completely reworked to where it now only goes up to maximum amount of stacks. And if you are not gaining Soul Eater stacks for a few seconds, you're going to slowly lose them. That means on a rare monster, after it's eaten up a bunch of monsters around it and there's nothing left, if you just run away for a second or two, it's going to very quickly start losing its Soul Eater stacks, meaning that is going to not become basically a raid boss anymore after just killing even a single pack near it. At the same time, this is going to affect player Soul Eater, meaning that you can only go to 40 stacks now, which means Soul Eater from Headhunter is going to be substantially weaker. Finally, and this is going to be the most controversial of changes, we are losing instant cast abilities being able to be put on left click. We are now going to be getting a new support gem, Automation, which is going to effectively give you the same thing. But the devs' reasoning for the left click change, in my opinion, is really stupid. They basically said that every single player was already doing this, and that's not good, and that if everyone is doing this, they should find a new way to fix it. But from them attempting to remove left click, they're also basically screwing with a lot of other things at the same time. And pretty much nobody's happy about this, because this also means you're losing a socket in your gear because you're going to now have to use a new support if you do want to have the automation of your left click ability being auto-casted for you. And in some builds, especially minion builds, which already have really bad socket pressure, it's going to be kind of hard to actually fit all this in. With all that said, there's also quite a lot of skill nerfs to talk about, because if you thought that was bad enough, well, there's a lot more to mention here. So the first big sticking point of all this is Volatile Dead is just dead. The change to Volatile Dead has made it so any balls that are currently active, whenever you're summoning more balls and those old balls go over the limit, just completely fizzle out and don't actually go to the enemy. This means you cannot spam cast balls anymore, and the current popular Volatile Dead build is Cast and Crit Volatile Dead, which allows you to spam a lot of balls per second. Basically means that it pretty much won't work anymore, and this is a pretty big overall nerf to Volatile Dead. If you are an Arc of Surging Enjoyer, which was a skill that was bugged and accidentally shotgunned enemies when it shouldn't have, well, that's also being nerfed as well. So Arc of Surging 2-tapping Uber bosses is just completely gone from the game. Moving on next, Tornado Shot has finally been nerfed, which is something I never expected to actually happen. The base attack speed granted from your bow is now 80% instead of 100%, meaning that you're going to attack a little bit slower with Tornado Shot, which wouldn't have been that bad. But at the same time, they're also changing the quality on it. So it's no longer the old lab enchant anymore. It's now just additional proj speed, which is going to make overlaps on Tornado Shot substantially worse, meaning its single target damage is going to be substantially weaker. Not only that, but Sniper's Mark is also being nerfed at the same time, to where instead of getting 4 splits by default, you are now only getting 2, and the increased damage that enemies were taking for projectiles is also being nerfed. This means you need substantially more mark effects to get additional splits. And at the same time, you are just losing 2 splits by default, meaning that's going to be very hard to scale additional splits moving forward. Now, if you cared about splits, Kinetic Blast of Fragmentation is also basically being nuked from the game. There is going to be a new support for it, which did look pretty interesting, but that doesn't matter anymore because it just does not do any damage. They have completely removed all of its intrinsic scaling with spell damage that it had for free. And realistically, trying to use a Crown of Eyes or trying to use the passive point on the tree is not going to realistically fix it, and this is going to be a pretty massive nerf to KB of Fragmentation when added on top of the Sniper's Mark change. Finally, brand players are also getting a decent amount of nerf. Transfigured Stormbrand is getting around a 50% damage nerf, which is going to suck, but should still be pretty playable. And at the same time, Penance Brand in this position is also getting around a 50% nerf, but honestly, that nerf is completely fine and you should not worry about it, because for the first month of Affliction, Penance Brand of Dissipation was bugged in the first place, so it was doing 50% less damage than it actually should have. And then mid-season, they patched it to where it was doing full damage. And well, with the nerfs to Penance Brand, it's basically going to reduce its damage by half, which means it's going to be just as strong as it was on launch day for Affliction, meaning that, well, it's still very, very broken. It should be just as strong as always. Now that we've gotten all of the major nerfs out of the way, why don't we talk about the good things about the season? All of the amazing changes that honestly I am very much looking forward to. So first off, we are getting a pretty massive rework to the Atlas tree in general, to how pinnacle bosses are going to be working and moving forward in Path of Exile, to juicing in general, which I am so excited about. And finally, we are permanently getting tier 17 maps added into the game. So let's start with the massive boss changes that are coming. So currently, if you wanted to do an Uber boss, let's say Uber Exarch, for example, you needed an Exarch invitation, which could have also gotten you into a normal Exarch kill. Because Uber Exarch just drops everything that normal Exarch drops, that means you are basically wasting your time if you can't actually do Uber Exarch. And all the people who are farming Exarch are always farming Uber Exarch because the drops are just better. And that means the invitation is priced around Uber Exarch. That means in general, the best play with your invitations isn't to actually bother doing them, but instead just sell them because, well, you would not be making that much money in comparison to someone who's doing Uber Exarch. And due to the high price of them, the amount of loot on average you should expect from the boss, it's just never going to be better than actually just selling the invitation. So what is being done about this is that the bosses are going to be split up to where you do not need to use the same invitation to access both bosses. So in the case of Uber Exarch, we would now be using one of the new fragment types to actually unlock the boss. The Exarch invitation will now only allow me to do a normal Exarch. And if I wanted to do any Uber version of any boss fight, I'd have to specifically get 5 awakening fragments, which I then put in my map device to open the portals to the Uber boss. Now, you might be asking yourself, how are you going to get these fragments? So these fragments are going to specifically come from the new tier 17 maps that are being added into the game. Valdo maps are still going to exist, and these are going to be separate tier 17 maps added on top of it, which in my opinion are going to be pretty cool as they're kind of going to work like Valdo's maps to where they have a set amount of modifiers on them. And the cool thing about these zones is that they are going to have their own special tile set and their own special bosses. At the end of each of these tier 17 maps, you're going to be able to fight a boss that is going to be somewhere in the difficulty zone between a normal pinnacle boss and an Uber pinnacle boss. You might have noticed how there's a really big gap in difficulty between normal bosses and Uber bosses, and tier 17 maps and the bosses they're going to be encountering inside of them are basically meant to fill in this gap. Now, these bosses they're going to be encountering here are going to be a few select bosses from elsewhere in the game, buffed up and given new abilities to make them deadly. So a good example of this would be that you're going to be able to fight Lycia from the Sanctum inside of one of these tier 17 maps. And if you are to succeed, you will then get a fragment, which you can then use to fight an Uber boss. In my opinion, I really like this change because not only are the bosses now separate, so the lower invitations are going to be worth actually running yourself, but they're also splitting up the loots. For example, they showed us the new Shaper loot, and what's going to happen there is, for example, Dying Sun will now be a normal Shaper drop only. That means doing Uber Shaper isn't going to just give you all the drops of normal Shaper, and instead, for Uber Shaper, you're going to be able to exclusively be able to get Void Forge, Sublime Vision, the Warcry helmet, and these items are going to be Uber Shaper exclusive only, meaning that Uber Shaper cannot get, for example, the Pierce Boots, Shaper's Touch, or a Dying Sun, and instead it's going to be completely separate. That means that these bosses are going to both have a reason to farm. For example, you might want to go farm Shaper because Dying Suns are worth quite a lot of money, but maybe a lot of players don't like doing it, and because you can't also just get the drops from Uber Shaper, that means the Dying Sun prices will only go down when people actually do normal Shapers instead of people just tanking it by doing Uber Shapers. In my opinion, I think it's going to be really cool, and I really like the implementations of this for the future of the economy moving forward. To add on to all this, if bossing is not your thing, the Atlas is getting quite a lot of big changes to it as well. So the first thing I want to say here is that Awakened Sextants and Compasses are just gone. GGG realized that people hate all the juicing they're going to have to do to be able to do an endgame map. You'd have to get Scarabs and Sextants and click on everything. And you have to make sure you have a map option, and you have to pick up a master, and you have to make sure you roll your maps. There's so many steps that we have to go through to actually be able to run a map. And they realize this is just not fun. And well, quite a lot of people agree with this. It's just not fun. And because of this, all compasses are just completely removed from the game. And instead, we are now getting more Scarabs, which are effectively going to attempt to fill in the gap that compasses did. So Scarabs are being completely reworked to where they're now going to be able to affect a larger portion of the game. And the cool thing about these Scarabs is that they are not just going to be better and better and better than each other in tiers like before. For example, a Gilded Ultimatum Scarab is not necessarily better than a Rusted Ultimatum Scarab. They're both going to do separate things. So in the case of those two, as you can see, the Rusted Ultimatum Scarab will now guarantee an ultimatum encounter, while at the same time, the Gilded Scarab, instead of giving you a guaranteed encounter, is going to make it so the Trial Master is always going to be at the end of all of your ultimatum. And the cool thing about this is that you can stack these, meaning I can open a map with a Rusted and a gilded ultimatum scarab at the same time, meaning I'm guaranteed an ultimatum encounter inside that map. And if I do complete it, I am guaranteed a trial master. This means you're going to be able to target farm specific things that you want to do more. And because these scarabs are split up like this, if I don't need the ultimatum chance, but I want to fight trial master and I can get my ultimatum chance, for example, from my Atlas tree, I can then just shove a bunch of gilded ultimatum scarabs on my maps to guarantee trial masters, if that's what I'm looking for. These are going to be able to open up quite a lot of new possibilities. And while a lot of these are going to be new and interesting like this, some of them are just going to be the powerful compass options that we all kind of know and love, just add it back in. So for example, there's going to be 3 new harvest scarabs. And I think what's going to happen here is going to be that one is going to be a guaranteed harvest, because we had a guaranteed harvest compass, and that would make sense. Another one is going to be a compass that doubles all juice that you get from doing the harvest. And maybe the third one is something like increase a shabby chance, or it's something to do with maybe bosses. So they're not going to all necessarily be super cool new things, but a lot of them are going to be pretty interesting, and they're going to allow you to be able to change how to do mapping a little bit more. Now, you might be looking at this and might be saying, okay, that's cool that they remove compasses, but isn't it going to be really annoying to get scarabs now, especially now there's a lot more scarabs? Well, yes, but scarabs have always traditionally dropped in really big bulk. And typically, scarabs are just something that people get by default, and people end up having quite big scarab piles stack up. So because of that, it's much easier to find bulk scarabs than it has, for example, been compasses. The other thing to mention here is that the Atlas is going to be massively changed to actually make getting scarabs a lot easier. A lot of the new nodes being added into the Atlas have to do with scarabs, and they're going to make scarabs substantially more common. Effectively, I would say scarabs are going to start feeling maybe like chaos orbs, where you see quite a lot of chaos orbs all over the place, maybe a little bit more common like alchemies, and you're just going to see so many scarabs all over the place that realistically you might be able to self-sustain a decent chunk of all the scarabs that you'd want for yourself. The point is, there's going to be substantially more scarabs circulating around the economy, meaning more people are going to have large bulks of scarabs, and you might be able to self-sustain a decent chunk on your own. And I'm really excited about all this because it's going to allow for so many new strategies to pop up around scarabs without us having to deal with compasses, because I know a lot of people did not want to do high-end strategies simply because buying compasses from people is probably the most depressing thing you could possibly do in Path of Exile. With all this put together, cuties, I am very, very excited for the upcoming season. Now, I know a lot of these nerfs feel kind of bad, and I'm personally really, really against the mana cost Flask craft being removed and the left click changes being removed. But outside of that, I'm pretty excited just due to all of the amazing endgame changes. Realistically, there's not much we can really do about all the nerfs and all the changes, but I'm going to try my best to adapt and move on and just think about the bright and amazing new endgame that we're being given, with bossing potentially being substantially more accessible to people and potentially being a strategy that more people can actually do, while at the same time us potentially having really cool and new unique ways to farm money in the new upcoming season, while at the same time having a substantially easier time setting up all the strategies through the additional Atlas passive trees and through the removal of compasses. If you have any questions on any of this, cuties, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below. And if you have any inputs that you'd want to give on the patch notes, feel free to say whatever you want to say. I'd be more than happy to have a discussion with any of you, cuties, and I really want to know what your opinion is on these upcoming changes. With all said, cuties, I am excited for the next upcoming season, and I have a lot more content for all of you, cuties, over the next few days leading up to the launch of Necropolis next Friday. And I hope that with all this, we can get everyone prepared for the upcoming season, and I hope everyone can have fun. With all that said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next video.